The Elite. If you want to know about Kite buggy records, then go to popeyethewelder.com, where he catalogues the records for different surfaces, different buggy configurations, top speeds and endurance records. Top of the list is the Elite Club, those kite buggiers who have broken 100 kilometers per hour. That's 62 miles an hour in old money. But I'm going to take you back long before that website was created, back to a different millennium, to 1998, and the third of Corey Jensen's buggy boogie thangs in El Mirage, in the heat of the dry lakes of California. At Buggy Boogie Thang 3, I met up with my friend Dave Culp. Hi Dave. Where we did some work to investigate the performance of kite buggies. Dave had done a considerable amount of preparation to permit proper investigation. He rigged a pole to the back of his old truck so that he could pull me along the lake on the kite buggy, with the pole holding the kite line up at the proper angle, and a spring balance, actually a bungee, to measure side force, and a protractor so that we could measure the drag angle. The surface where we tested was hard clay with a small amount of grit on top that made it slightly slippery. At slower speeds we found that the drag angle was only 5 degrees, but that it increased as we towed the buggy faster. Allow me to explain what I mean by drag angle. The truck was towing the buggy. It is obvious that you can just trundle along behind the truck, but if you steer to one side, you can come alongside. If you wanted to, you could slingshot ahead of the truck and maybe get run over, but what we were interested in was the maximum angle that you could sustain consistently, because the closer you can get to 90 degrees, the more efficient the vehicle. We were managing 85 degrees at slow speeds, with the angle and the corresponding efficiency dropping at higher speeds. Because the tow point was high, I put 10 degrees of tilt on the truck. Dave was concerned that I might actually be able to tip the truck with a shock load at high speed. Dave had kitted the truck out with a wind speed meter and a weather vane with display in the cab so that he could chase me and record the apparent wind speed and the direction that I was experiencing. Note that a calibrated speedometer was the best we were going to get for speed measurement. Accurate GPS was a tool only available to the military. It was not made available to the public until 2 years later. That said, there was an alternative speed measuring facility available if we had wanted to organise it. For $40 an hour, with a 2-hour minimum, you could hire the Nevada State Police. They would come out into the middle of the desert in uniform and park a state trooper in the middle of the lake bed and stand there with a speed gun. If you did a fast run past him, he would zap you with a gun and write you an official speeding ticket with a record of the speed that you had achieved. Since the ticket was issued by the Nevada Police for a speed achieved in the California desert, it was outside of the officer's jurisdiction, so you were safe in the knowledge that the charge would never stick. But it did provide solid evidence of your speed in the days before GPS. So anyway, El Nino had arranged for the lake bed itself to be flooded at the beginning of the week, making the lake bed out of bounds for all vehicles to preserve the flat running surface. We spent the best part of a week not buggying, but rather telling lies about how fast we would be going, if only we could. The story that I was telling in camp was that the perceived wisdom for speed runs was wrong. The way that everybody else was doing it was to go out in a gale with a tiny kite and rip down a beam reach, holding on for dear life, and that the record was going to whoever was endowed with the largest testicles. I was countering that success lay in a different direction, that there was a downwind course where magic things happened, where you could go directly downwind, faster than the wind, and somehow not have the kite falling out of the sky. This was generally dismissed as obviously ridiculous. How could you possibly use a kite to go downwind faster than wind speed? The entire concept is preposterous. Everyone knows that if you go downwind faster than the wind, you'll run over the kite lines, you'll leave the kite behind. Clearly, I was being delusional. Dave had to leave to earn a crust, but he left his truck behind for us to play with. And as soon as he did so, strong wind arrived, evaporated the water, firmed up the lake bed, and we had our first chance to buggy. At this point, I must acknowledge the sacrifice of my fellow buggiers. The whole camp had spent a week being frustrated because we couldn't buggy on the wet lake bed, and now I wanted to do a speed run downwind, at right angles to the course that everybody else would be running. I wanted the whole lake bed to myself. And bless them, they gave it to me. Everyone stayed back while Matt Harrell, Steve Webb and John Gabby assisted me in the difficult task of launching into the run. I was attempting to fly a 7.7 square metre chevron, sat in a Peter Lind folding buggy, and was trying to launch in 27 miles an hour of wind. This was way too much power for a normal launch. I could not stand, launch the kite and jump into the buggy. I would have been sliding down the player out of control. So Matt's job was to hold the kite and launch it. Not the whole kite at once, he would hold the kite right at the edge of the window and enable the wingtip to inflate, and together we would feed the kite into the wind so that it would launch directly into a tip stand at the edge of the window. Steve Webb stayed with me, helping to manage the buggy and holding me back and into the seat to stop me from rolling away out of control. John Gabby was in the chase truck, observing and measuring. It was a very difficult launch. Despite keeping the kite stalled through the launch procedure, it would still produce more power than we could resist, and we would roll downwind as Matt was feeding the kite into the air. It took 4 attempts before I managed to get away into a run without stuffing up the launch. The launch looks like this. I start with the kite right out at the edge of the window, stalled, trying to avoid waking it up because if it wakes up it will kill me. But I can't hold it there. I'm rolling towards the kite, and as I roll forward, the kite slides back downwind. I'm keeping the kite at the edge of the apparent wind window, but the kite is falling back into the middle of the real wind window. As I gingerly roll forward, the kite falls back. As I roll forward more, the kite falls back more. And by the time I reach this point, I'm in 27 miles an hour of wind, rolling downwind at about the same speed, with the kite stalled, delivering no power. At this point, I decide to wake up the kite. I steer against it, powering it up, and it responds like a weapon. It was all I could do to keep the lightweight buggy underneath me. In the words of John Gabby in the truck chasing me, I accelerated from 0 to 30, and then I was doing 60. The faster speed brings the kite right round to the opposite side of the wind from where it was to start with. We're going at around 2.5 times wind speed, so the apparent wind that I am feeling in the buggy is nothing like the real wind that you would feel standing still on the player. The apparent wind looks something like this. This all seems implausible and complicated when I try to explain it, but in the buggy it is the most natural thing in the world. All you can sense is the apparent wind. That's what you buggy in. That's what you react to. That's what you've always buggied in. The direction might be a bit screwy, but you're on an upwind course just trying to go as fast as you can. And yet there is something different about it. How does kite buggying work when you're going downwind faster than the wind? How do you extract energy from the wind when the wind you can feel is only there because you are going faster than it is? The answer is that roles are reversed. In normal buggying, the wind pushes the kite and the pilot comes along for the ride. On the faster than the wind downwind course, the pilot powers the kite. To go faster, you steer against the kite, that powers it up, and the kite delivers more power and more speed back to you. So how does this work in practice? Well, to start with, I use long lines, say 50 meters or more. Anyone who has buggied like this will recognise that the kite reacts differently on long lines in strong wind. If you do something crazy, like a power dive down through the middle of the window, you're going to be regretting it for a long time as the kite moves slowly through that space. The kite spends a long time in the power zone. So let's do exactly that. From the pilot's point of view, considering only the apparent wind that you can sense, Let's start with the kite at the top of the window and take that suicidal route, a power dive straight down through the middle of the window. But don't be half-hearted about it. Don't turn the kite and expect it to do the work. Instead, kick the steering against the kite and drive the kite down the window. It will try to kill you. It will give you a kick in the small of the back and try to pull you over the foot pegs. But don't relent. Power it down towards the ground. The kite is going faster than the wind, but it still manages to extract energy from the real wind and deliver all the power you can ask for. It is during this stage that I achieved this step change in speed. By powering the kite into the dive, the buggy speed went from 30 to 60 in no time flat. When you reach the bottom, turn round and bring the kite back up to the top of the window. It will be stalled trying to laugh, but use the momentum of the buggy to persuade it back up the window. Then turn around and dive down the middle of the window again. The amount of power delivered is huge and the speed significant, but one of the biggest surprises was the smoothness. When you're on a beam reach holding on for dear life in a gale, you're getting shaken to bits on a white knuckle ride. But this is different, since all the wind you feel is wind that is generated from your own movement. The apparent wind is as smooth as silk. The feeling isn't that of a runaway go-kart on a steep bumpy hill, but rather you have the smoothness and control that feels like driving a car down the motorway. The technique is not about trying to control the power of a crazed 3-metre kite, but instead it is balancing the steering effort to manage the power delivered. With a properly set up stunt buggy, the point of balance between steering and side force is reflected in the position of the buggy. If you're not near the limit, you're sitting down in the buggy. If you overdo it, the buggy will tip you out on the ground. However, when you're right on the edge, you'll find yourself riding on two wheels. Not with the raised wheel high in the air, but rather with it not quite making contact with the ground, as you ride that balance point for the maximum side force and are rewarded by a reduction in rolling resistance as a bonus. And so it was that I was doing 64 miles an hour across the playa, comfortably relaxed, balanced on two wheels. At a mile a minute, it isn't long before you run out of lake bed, and the high voltage power lines at the bottom of the lake loom into view. Not wanting to try any heroics, I dumped the kite and took a long sweeping turn to slow down to a safe stop. A few days later, Dave Culp returned to the lake bed, and I took him for a downwind ride in the tandem. Not to break any records, but to give him first-hand experience of the course taken. Whilst I concentrated on the buggying, he could act as a skilled observer. As I knew, the main section of the course consisted of two phases. The power phase, where I drove the kite into the power dive in the middle of the window, followed by a recovery phase, where I teased the kite back up to altitude. He reports that the power phase was in a direction that was exactly downwind. The recovery phase was angled off at one side, merely 10 degrees from the downwind direction. At the time, the official record, measured by radar gun, was 51 miles an hour. My aim was to do research and development, and I didn't have the radar gun, witnesses and video recording that would have been required to claim a new record. But the message was clear. Just one successful attempt at this method was enough to leave the traditional beam reach approach in the dust. And yet, 20 years later, it seems that no one has learned from my success. Sure, the record has crept up incrementally from 51 to 84 miles per hour over the last 2 decades. And there are now 52 people in the 100 km/h elite club. But as far as I can see, everyone is still taking the same broad reach approach of small kite, large testicles and hold on. No one is taking the high efficiency, faster than the wind approach. I thoroughly believe that if we are ever going to break 100 miles an hour, this is the way we're going to do it. Finally, I want to thank everyone who made this run possible. The late Corrie Jensen, the Mayor of Buggytown, Dave Culp for his insight and equipment, Matt, John and Walt for their hands-on assistance, and all the buggiers who stayed off the pristine player to let me have the lake bed to myself for the run. Thank you.